Hello and welcome to X Witness Awake. I am your host, Jonathan. Today we'll be taking a dive into the love hate relationship of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society and the United Nations. But first, let's run the old introduction. If you were associated with Jehovah's Witnesses, as I was in the late 80s and the early 90s, then you'll probably remember the Revelation Grand Climax book. This book was a detailed breakdown of the prophetic events of the book of Revelations. Many a witness would scratch their head in confusion and think to themselves, I guess this makes sense. The Revelation book is remembered for its nightmare inducing imagery. At least to me, the first illustration that comes to mind is that of the 10-horned, 7-headed, scarlet-colored wild beast. This creature is portrayed with a woman riding on its back. The woman, Babylon the Great, is of course the world's false religions. The beast she rides upon is none other than the United Nations, widely known as a peacekeeping organization, as well as for humanitarian efforts. The Watchtower first named its predecessor, the League of Nations, as the Beast, then identifying it as the United Nations after its inception in 1945 at the conclusion of World War II. How have the Jehovah's Witnesses viewed the UN throughout the years? There's a reason why they view this organization effectively as a monster. They feel that the United Nations is an insult to Jehovah God as they attempt to bring order and peace to a world that is waiting on Jehovah God to do just that. As such, Jehovah's Witnesses have done everything to separate themselves from this political system.
Right?
In October of 2001, the Guardian newspaper in the UK published 2 articles that expose the Watchtower as being associated with the UN as an NGO, or non-governmental organization. As an NGO, the Watchtower will be required to promote the ideals of the UN. It's during this time that certain articles published in the Watchtower were less than critical of the work of the UN. Of course, they were worded in such a way as to not be so obvious that their stance on the UN had changed from only a few years prior. So just to prove the point, here's an example of a not-so-critical article regarding the UN. In the Awake of 1991, September the 8th, pages 3 and 4, we find the article, What is Happening at the United Nations? Something is happening at the United Nations. Startling developments are taking place that are going to affect your future. World leaders are very optimistic about them. Consider these words. 45 years after its birth, after being long paralyzed, the United Nations is unfolding itself before our eyes and is now emerging as a true judge, setting forth the law and endeavoring to enforce it. This from President Francois Mitterrand of France in 1990 at the General Assembly of the United Nations. At the same meeting, former Soviet Minister of Foreign Affairs Edward, I can't pronounce his name, observed that one cannot help being satisfied at the unprecedented unity of the UN Security Council. The positions taken by members of the United Nations organization give the Security Council the mandate to go as far as the interests of world peace will require. A few days later, President George Bush of the United States addressed the UN General Assembly. The changes he saw inspired him to say, not since 1945 have we seen the real possibility of using the United Nations as it was designed, as a center for international collective security. He said this because the United Nations reacted with such historic unity and resolve to the Persian Gulf crisis. For the first time, the UN Security Council is beginning to work as it was designed to work. He also said, the United Nations can help bring about a new day if its members leave terrible weapons behind. By doing this, they can complete the historic movement toward a new world order and a long era of peace. Now, it goes on to say more, but rather than just read the whole thing, that's kind of boring. You can read it for yourself if you like. But you can see this is definitely not critical of the UN. Once the cat was out of the bag, due to the Guardian articles, the governing body at the time moved quickly to distance themselves from the UN. They almost immediately withdrew as an NGO from the UN. They issued a resignation letter to the DPI, or Department of Public Information, of the United Nations, citing that they were not aware of their requirements. The requirements, however, were exactly the same as they were when they had joined as an NGO in 1992, 9 years prior. What was the reason for joining the UN in the first place? According to the Watchtower, it was to obtain access to the United Nations library system. However, joining the UN was never a requirement in order to gain access. Was it really a matter of status as a UN partner? We may never know the exact answer to that question of why. And with that, they never associated with the United Nations again.
Right?
Many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are aware of the information that has been presented so far. Would it surprise you to find out that there is more to the story and the Watchtower is still dipping its toes in the UN's pool? Fast forward to recent months. During the last 2 years, the witnesses had moved their meetings to Zoom and service to the phone and to keyboards and handwritten letter-writing campaigns. During this time, a representative of JW.org, Robert Hendricks, had been busy on the morning TV circuit and various websites to promote the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses. Meet Robert Hendricks.
The U.S. spokesperson for the Jehovah's Witnesses, Robert Hendricks. Good morning, Robert Hendricks.
Good morning, Stacy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being.
And I welcome you to our very special coverage of worshiping during the pandemic. Over the last year and a half or so, we've been giving updates on what one particular religious organization is doing during this pandemic, how they're keeping their members safe, how they're keeping the public safe when it comes to their ministry. Well, we're going to get an update. We know things are opening up, and we've heard some announcements of them resuming and their in-person congregation meetings. So we asked them to come back on to give us an update of how that's going and what we have to look forward to. And also, in Ukraine, and they even have members who lived in Ukraine, who had to flee Ukraine, and we're going to find out what type of humanitarian efforts that they're doing to help those out in that part of the world. So without any further delay, let's welcome our very, very special guest. I am so delighted to welcome back the U.S. spokesperson for Jehovah's Witnesses, the United States branch. We're talking about Robert Hendricks. Robert, welcome back, my friend. How are you?
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be back. Doing very well. We really are, and we're excited about the news that we have to talk about today for us. It's been 2 years since we've met in person at our Kingdom Halls. In fact, globally, our Kingdom Halls have been shut down since the early spring of 2020.
After 2 years of virtual meetings, all congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses across the world will return to in-person gatherings. Joining me to discuss what this return could look like for their members is National Spokesman for Jehovah's Witnesses, Robert J. Hendricks. Robert, thank you so much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having us.
Events have been canceled, postponed, or gone virtual because of the pandemic. One of these events is the Jehovah's Witnesses Global Convention. It's happening right here in Toledo, usually. With us this morning is Robert J. Hendricks III to tell us all about the changes they've made to the convention and the theme for the
Meetings. And we have not opened our 13,000 congregations for in-person meetings.
Welcome back to Great Day. According to some estimates, there are about 4,200 religions and belief systems around the world. Even among same religions, there are differences in how we observe. Our next guest considers his religion as Christian. They worship at the Kingdom Hall instead of a church, and they don't celebrate Christmas or other holidays, and a funeral is called a memorial. Joining us with some clarification on what they do and do not believe, welcome Robert Hendricks, U.S. spokesman for the Jehovah's Witness. Good morning. Thank you very much.
It would seem that Mr. Hendricks is a busy guy. He seems to get around. A quick Google search, and you'll find that Mr. Hendricks gives a testimonial of faith on a website named the Michael Trust. What is the Michael Trust? Let's find out. If you go to their website, themichaeltrust.com, you can see that the purpose of the Michael Trust today is to encourage the elimination of all forms of intolerance and discrimination based on religion. Robert Hendricks gives his statement of faith. So this article here is written by a former Jehovah's Witness. It says here, I write about Jehovah's Witnesses for two reasons. First, I used to be one and continue to communicate with them in a respectful way. Secondly, as they are the most persecuted and misunderstood faith-based organization in the world. So this person, it would seem, is probably someone who is faded or is physically out and mentally in, and has written this article regarding Mr. Hendricks. As you can see here, some of the tweets that the Michael Trust has put out would fit well on the current news section of jw.org. So, how is this at all relevant to the discussion that we're having today? If we go to the About Us page, we can see that today the purpose of the Michael Trust is to encourage the elimination of all forms of intolerance and discrimination based on religion and belief by upholding the Charter of the United Nations. The Michael Trust is non-sectarian. So, while the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is no longer an NGO, as far as we know, with the United Nations, they have got in with an NGO of the United Nations, the Michael Trust. So their purpose is to do away with intolerance when it comes to religion and persecution that happens to various religious groups. Now, this is something that seems a little hypocritical on the case of the Jehovah's Witnesses because they are well known for their policy on shunning. So it would seem that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the governing body, just can't seem to leave that United Nations alone. While they will continue to say the United Nations is an instrument of evil, they seem to be really friendly with them one way or the other. Perhaps it would be useful for the Michael Trust to know that the Jehovah's Witnesses are in fact people who do not treat their ex-members with any sort of kindness or love and are happy to discriminate against them. In fact, I strongly believe that it would be useful for all nations of the world to be alerted to the fact that the Jehovah's Witnesses treat people this way. That they, in fact, are ones who discriminate and persecute ex-members. Whether they be ones that were put out due to some sort of infraction, or ones who have left of their own accord because they have found that they can no longer support the organization in its practices. To the governing body, please know that apostates are watching what's going on, and we will report it. So, how did you like my scripted stuff? Usually I just do this on the fly, but I thought, you know what, I'll make sure that my thoughts are concise and to the point, and maybe it'll go a little better than normal. So I want to thank you for watching, and please support the channel if you can, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Until then, bye for now.